you. Thank you. Hello, Aiken. It is great to be back. Thank you so much. I want to thank my friend Representative Bill Clyburn for what he said. Mayor Dunbar, thank you for being here. Councilwoman Price, Councilwoman Diggs, Councilman Hightower. I thank the chair of the Democratic Party in this county, Harold Crawford, Louisiana Sanders, a longtime friend of Hillary's and mine, Superintendent Alfred and Principal Cofer. Thank you for letting us come to this high school. In many ways, it symbolizes what this election is all about. For all of you, which is just a few of you, who are almost as old as I am, I want to say something to the young people here. At some time in your life, you'll get up in the morning, take a shower, look in the mirror, and it will hit you, boom. You have more yesterdays than tomorrows. And it's not a bad thing if you've had a good life. Because what happens is, for the rest of your life, you think about everybody else's tomorrows. That's what this election's about. When the president gave his last State of the Union, he painted a very pretty picture of America's future. He said, I know we still have problems, but look at our assets. Of all the big countries in the world, we're growing the fastest. We have 14 million jobs in the last 5 years. That's the fastest job growth rate America's had since that last Democrat was president, whoever he was. And he said, we have 90% of our people with health insurance for the first time in the history of the country. He said, we have this young, vibrant, diverse workforce. In a global economy, in an interdependent world, it's a huge asset. We got manufacturing coming back to America. You see that in South Carolina. We have 900,000 manufacturing jobs coming back. We have the best scientific and technological base. We're learning how to train people for the jobs of tomorrow. The young people here, almost all of you will live to be well into your 80s. A significant number of you will live to be 100. And if I were 25 again, and I'd like to be, but if I were, and somebody gave me one of those magic lanterns, you know, and a genie comes out and says, the genie says, I'll let you live anywhere you want 25 years from now, but you have to decide right this minute, I'd pick America in a heartbeat. Now, so why is there so much angst and anxiety and anger in this election? I watched a little of that Republican debate last night. I thought I was going to get to see a three-way boxing match there for a while. I'll tell you why. And that's what the election's all about. There's still too many Americans who look at that beautiful picture the president painted of our future, and they can't find themselves or their kids in it to save their lives. Because most Americans still haven't gotten a pay raise. It takes 10 years to get over one of these things. We got the jobs back early, but not the wage increases. Because too many young people are more worried about paying their debts for college than having a job they love, thinking about whether they'll ever be able to own a home instead of move out of their folks' house, thinking about whether they could ever get a loan to start a business if they had a good idea. So what we have to do in this country, and what this whole election is about, is to extend the possibilities of the modern world to everybody and to minimize the pain, to put every single American in the picture that was painted in the State of the Union so we can all rise together. That's really why Hillary's running for president, because she believes we will never be the country we ought to be until we're all rising together again. And the only thing I want to say, especially to younger people for whom my presidency occurred in the dark ages, we can rise together because we did it then. We did it then. We had 95% of the American people had greater income gains when I served than when President Reagan was in office. And that's the only time trickle-down economics even halfway worked. And because we tripled the debt of the country, we went on an 8-year sugar high. But most of the gains went to people at the upper end. So the top 5% or so of the American people, they did better when he was president. The rest did better when I was president. Because we built the economy from the ground up and the middle out. So look what happened. Upper middle class, 60 to 80th percentile, 25% greater income gains. The middle, 70% greater. The working class did more than twice as well. But the thing I'm proudest of is the people who were working their way up, getting their first foothold. The people from 0 to 20% of incomes, their incomes went up 30 times as much, and 100 times as many people moved out of poverty into the middle class, and we all did it together. African-American household income, Latino household income rose more than anybody else's because we built it from the bottom up, and we can do it again. And nobody was mad at anybody else. And nobody pretended that the government was either the source of every problem we've got, that's a Republican debate, or the only solution to every problem we've got, which is not the American way. We have to do this together. So her premise is, if you want everybody in the picture, we got to have shared economic prosperity built on true equal opportunity. We've got to have a society that's inclusive too, where everybody feels at home. To do that, we have to have inclusive politics where every voice is heard. And we have to have a national security strategy in a dangerous world where our borders often look more like nets than walls, that relies, yes, on a strong defense, which South Carolina has more than contributed its fair share to, yes, on a tough diplomacy, but also recognizes we live in a world where you can't possibly kill, jail, or occupy everybody that is or might be against you. So we also have to have a world where we're making more partners and fewer enemies. And now, that is the framework within which this election's happening. And I believe that Hillary is, by a long ways, the best candidate running in either party for a simple reason. She understands what the challenge is, how best to address it, and she's got the best record as a change maker. Now, if you look at if you listen to our friends in the Republican Party talk, you say, we used to be a great country, but Obama and the Democrats just trashed it. Never mind the fact that we're outperforming everybody else. Never mind the fact that they left them on the brink of a Great Depression. We avoided the Depression, saved the auto industry, and it brought 900,000 manufacturing jobs back. Never mind the fact that we got 90% of our people with health insurance in the first place. But still, every election is about the future. What do you do now? Can we recover broad-based prosperity? Can we all rise together? Yes, we can. But we shouldn't say America's not great, and if we pick the right person on the right horse, we'll be great again. We never stop being great. We stop being whole. We need to make America whole again, where everybody is part of the picture. And instead of building walls, Hillary said we should tear down barriers, economic and non-economic barriers, and build ladders of opportunity and empowerment. That is what we need to build. How are we going to do that? First of all, we need ladders to more jobs, higher incomes, and more new businesses. We need a major commitment in this country to modernize our infrastructure, and to make America the world's clean energy superpower, because you can't move those jobs. You can't move those clean energy jobs. You can't move those infrastructure jobs. And because we need it, it will enable us all to grow together. Yes, highways and roads and bridges and airports and seaports, yes, all that. But you were heartbroken by what you read about Flint, Michigan, weren't you? Every person who's ever had a child could imagine how you would feel if your child was born with elevated lead levels that did irreversible brain damage. And by the way, it's a two-way street. It not only decreases what you can learn, it increases your ability to lose self-control and get in trouble. We're all mad. Here's what you need to know. It is far from the only place in America where there are elevated lead levels in the blood of our babies, and they deserve a better future. We can replace all those bad lead pipes and put a lot of people to work doing it. And she wants to put up 500 million solar panels in 4 years. In 8 years, have every American home, wherever it is, electrified by energy the people own, here at home. We rank first or second in the world in every scientific survey in the capacity to generate our own power, so we never have to worry about anybody else again, from the sun, the wind, and other clean resources. And, you know, our party, we still believe in scientific research. And so, and believe it or not, one of the best labs is the oil capital of America, Texas. Texas is one of 3 states that already gets a third or more of its electricity from the wind, even when the politicians aren't talking. Iowa does. Iowa has the lowest electric rates in the United States because they get so much of it from the wind. You pay the windmills, they're expensive, then it's all free. So we got to do this. It'll create millions of jobs, but it's not enough. 2/3 of all the jobs created in the last 20 years have been created by small business. So we got to think about how can we get that going again. We were always in the top 5 in small business creation before this crash of all the countries. We're not in the top 10 anymore. And there are a number of reasons why, but Hillary wants to focus on one or two. One is that the Dodd-Frank bill that President Obama signed, which I think next to the health care law was the most important law he signed, is way stronger to make sure that Wall Street can't wreck Main Street again than anything we had for 50 years before. It says the president, through appointments to the Securities Exchange Commission and the banking regulators, can break up any financial institution that takes too much risk and gambles with money instead of investing in money the old-fashioned way. The problem is a lot of people got scared about that when it happened before, anybody that went through this. So a lot of smaller banks are in effect being covered by regulations that have been handed down that were never supposed to apply to small business lending, farm lending, young entrepreneurs with a new tech idea. Hillary wants to make sure that community banking can go on in the old-fashioned way. If it costs us the same amount of money for a bank to make an $80,000 loan to start a business that it does to make an $8 million loan, there won't be as many $80,000 loans made. It's not complicated. She wants to get back to community banking. We enforced a law when I was president called the Community Reinvestment Act. More than 90% of the lending ever done under that law, $800 billion, was done when I served. When the banks were in trouble, it wasn't applicable. If we did that again, if we double small business lending to minority borrowers, to women borrowers, to people who lived in small town and rural areas like we did before, you would have a renaissance in small businesses and people would have some place to go to work when they got out of school. It would make a very, very big difference in this country. And we got to keep the manufacturing jobs coming back. Here's the good news. Look at the ones you're getting now in South Carolina. You don't need to compete on low wages anymore. You need to compete on skills. Why? Because every year manufacturing can produce more and more things with fewer people. Labor becomes less important as a cost, and materials, transportation, and energy become more important. Therefore, if you're making stuff for the American market, if you can afford the energy, you save all the transportation costs of hauling it from somewhere else to the United States. We have just begun. But we have to aggressively train people for jobs in advanced manufacturing, which you're doing a pretty good job of here in South Carolina. I've been traveling around looking at it. And we have to enforce our laws. You can't let people manipulate their currency to invade our market when they couldn't win fair. You can't let people make Americans give up their technology if we're selling stuff overseas, so they steal our technology and make the stuff there and we can't export it anymore. You can't subsidize people moving their plants overseas. Instead, you should subsidize people bringing their jobs home. You've got to do that. But we can do that. Like I said, under President Obama, we got 900,000 jobs back. When I was president, we gained jobs in manufacturing 6 of the 8 years I served. We can do it. We just got to put our heads on straight and do it. And we got to do something for the areas that are left out and left behind. Our friends in, I'm getting to that. Our friends in West Virginia that spent all those decades mining coal to keep our lights on, sent their kids off to fight in our wars. They didn't do anything wrong, but we can't keep using coal. It's bad for the atmosphere and it's not economical anymore. Natural gas is cheaper, clean energy is cheaper, but that doesn't mean we are right to walk off and leave them behind. All those folks in the other parties, they brag about how much they love coal. Coal employment in this country peaked 96 years ago. Coal production peaked in 1950. Who are we kidding? Why haven't we done something for all these small towns and rural areas everywhere in America where the jobs are gone, by giving people more incentives to reinvest in those areas and giving them access to universal broadband they can afford so they can bring the American economy home? That's what we need to do. Those are the things we ought to do. Now, how are we going to raise incomes? We're going to, I hope, realize that one of the biggest problems is anybody in this country that works for a company that is a stock company, that is, they sell their shares on the stock market, has been affected by this 40-year effort that seems to gain steam every year to say the only people that matter to this company are the stockholders. For 40 years, we built the greatest middle class the world has ever seen with companies who said, yeah, the stockholders matter, but so do our customers, so do our employees, so do the companies of which we are a part. And that was the law. That's what I was taught when I was a young law student. And now people say, we got billionaire stockholders who buy stock in these companies and actually try to force them even to sell profitable businesses because it'll jump the stock price up, and then they can sell a year and a day after they bought the stock and get a lower tax. They don't care what happens to our jobs. They don't care what happens to our communities. Over any 10-year period, the old-fashioned companies make more money. That is, the ones that share their profits with their employees on a regular basis, that help their employees' kids go to school, that practice good leave policies. They do better. We got to get back to that. We have to have serious incentives for companies to engage in profit sharing with their employees and in the communities where they live. And I think this is really, really important. The other thing we need is to recognize that we were always in the top 10 in the percentage of women in the workforce until this crash. and we are not yet back to the top 20. And there's a reason for that. We're one of only 7 countries in the world that doesn't offer paid leave. You know how many families there are out there with a kid with an autistic condition that needs some flexibility in taking care of it? Or a parent now with Alzheimer's and nobody else to take care of them and the family members swapping off? You ought to be able to succeed in being a good family member and in being a good worker. That's why Hillary said if we had paid leave and we had equal pay, it would be good for every man in America because we'd get more people in the workforce, creating more wealth and working together so we could all rise. Now, then there's this barrier of the cost of college. It is absolutely true that we have the best system of higher education in the world. I just was reading a list that the Economist magazine publishes every year saying that 15 of the top 17 universities in the world were in the United States. And even if it's a little wrong, we're doing pretty good. Right? There are hundreds of places in the United States where you can get a great undergraduate degree. But the cost of college has gone up like crazy, and especially in public colleges, state colleges. Why? Because we went through this recession, and a lot of the governors wanted to keep cutting taxes, and they had to pay for the schools as best they could, and they had these big prison costs. I'll say more about that in a minute. So the public colleges started acting like the private colleges. So you've got all these people with all this debt already, and kids worried sick going in. Here's what Hillary wants to do. Everybody ought to be able to graduate from a 4-year public college debt-free. Debt-free. Everybody, people who need it should get free tuition. If they're lower income, they should get more help with books and expenses. People who can pay a little can pay a little. And she wants to create 1 million positions so everybody who needs it can earn 10 hours a week worth of income doing work study. That'll lower the cost of the colleges and keep tuition down, and it won't kill anybody to work 10 hours a week. And then she wants upper income people to pay their kids' own way, because if you want to raise taxes on upper income people, just take me for example, you don't want to run my money through the government just to pay tuition for one of my grandchildren. What you want is to take my money and put it in the hands of people who will create middle-class jobs that pay good wages and doing things for America. And here's the kicker. What about the people that already have a lot of debt? I don't know, when I travel around, I always go in and get a cup of coffee somewhere. And I'm always served by a young person. And I always say, how long you had this job? And I always have a conversation, not so much like one I had last week in New York City. 5 years, she said, on and off. I said, what was off? She said, off was when I was going to college. I said, what's on? She said, when I'm back here paying the debt off so I can go again. I said, you living at home? She said, yeah, I am. Couldn't afford to pay rent and make my college debt. And it'll go on and on and on like that. Hillary wants to do 2 things that are really important. One, let people refinance college debt like they can a home. It's the only debt in America you can't refinance. If every student that had debt could refinance it as a home would be refinanced today, overnight, listen to this, 25 million people would save $2,000 apiece. Overnight. Then, she wants to say a college education is like a home. It's a lifetime asset, and you ought to be able to pay for it over 20 years as a low, fixed percentage of your after-tax income so you can do whatever you want with your life. Now think about this. If we did this, and she wants to do this for public and private college debt, any college debt, you could move out of your parents' house. You could go to the bank and get a loan to start a little business without your credit being compromised. If you had a job you took just so you could make your death payments, and there was one over here you'd love, but it paid a little less, you could take that job because your debt payment would go down. And if you do a public service job, you can knock $17,500 off your loan. And if you took 2 years to work in community service in AmeriCorps, you could get rid of it altogether. 100% would be gone. Now, think about it. You want to let people free to put themselves in the picture? That would do it. Millions of people. Get rid of these barriers. The second thing we got to realize is there are some non-economic barriers that we have to deal with. And I want to talk about them that have economic consequences. There are still too many veterans with a high unemployment rate. Hillary wants to keep the VA, but keep making it better. Let me tell you what happened to the VA health system. I worked hard to fix it when I was president. We had good people and it had great ratings. But they were overwhelmed by what was otherwise a good story. More people survived combat in Afghanistan and Iraq than in any previous war, when subject to, among other things, the impacts of roadside bombs. But they came home with brain injuries, with lost limbs, with post-traumatic stress syndrome. The Veterans Health System was overwhelmed. Some people say we ought to just get rid of it. Hillary does not agree with that. She thinks there are too many people who are especially sensitive to the needs of our veterans, and they can be better cared for there, but they've got to have the resources to do it. And we can't tolerate a situation where a lot of veterans did jobs in the service that are very comparable to jobs in the private sector, and they still got a higher unemployment rate than the general population. We can't have that. We got to put veterans in the workforce. We have to put able people with disabilities back in the workforce. We need everybody. And we got to get over that. Then let's look at one other thing that I think is important to remember, or that the non-economic barriers, the things that are keeping us from being one society. We got too many people in prison. We have the highest percentage of people in prison of any country on earth for nonviolent offenses. No other country has this many people in prison. But, and Hillary, let's be frank here, there's only 10% of them are in the federal system. So the president can have direct impact on 10%, but indirect impact on the other 90. And I think there's a chance for bipartisan cooperation here. A lot of Republicans agree with us that we got too many people in prison. But she says you can't just let these people go if you've kept them in prison for 5 years, and then they walk out with no skills, no education, no training, and the first time they apply for a job, there's a little box where you've got to say yes or no. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? If we're going to let them out, she wants to spend $5 billion to train them to do things so they can succeed and make them not have to check the box. Give these young people a chance to begin again. We need police reform. We're all sick of seeing these videos of these young people shot who should never have lost their lives. You may have seen a few days ago, Hillary was in South Carolina with the mothers of a lot of these young men who've been killed. We're tired of that. We need police reform, but we also need the police. You know, if you watched that horrible set of killings in San Bernardino, one of the things that I noticed were those police kept putting themselves in harm's way over and over again. They were trying to save lives without regard to religion, to race, to anything else. They were doing what you always hoped the law enforcement community would do. So what are we going to do? We need enough police so that we can get police that look like the people they're policing, and so that they're not in cars or military-sized equipment. They're actually walking the streets in the neighborhoods. They will prevent more crime from happening, and when something goes wrong, They should do what some of our cities are doing now that you never read about because they don't have problems. There's a neighborhood council. The police answer to the neighborhood council. They meet together. They decide what happened. Then they decide what to do. We've got to have police reform and police, and that's the way to get it. I'm convinced she has the right approach, and we ought to do that. We need sensible background checks on gun purchases. Look, I get what's going on. I was governor of Arkansas for 12 years. I had a .22 when I was 10. I was shooting cans off fence posts, living out in the country. I hope I'll be the last president that ever spent any time in a house without indoor plumbing. I had a .410 shotgun when I was 12 or 13 years old. We literally had to close the schools on the first day of deer season because nobody's going to show up anyway. I get this. I know what it's like to have a lot of your people living way out in the country, 50 minutes, an hour from the nearest law enforcement. And they need to be able to protect their families if something unforeseen happens. I get it. But the debate has been twisted because we're so divided. So you can't talk sense into people, and really a smaller percentage of households own guns now than they did when I was president. So this is a business strategy. The gun manufacturers think only way they can keep making money is to scare the living daylights out of every gun owner and get them to have more guns per home. They're coming to get your guns. And when I ran for re-election as president, I went to New Hampshire where a guy had lost his job voting for background checks. And I said, if you missed a day, if you missed an hour in the deer woods because of any law I passed, because we did, we got rid of the most prominently used assault weapons, put an ammunition clip on it, and had background checks. I said, I want you to vote against me. I really want you to vote for me, but if you'd missed anything, if you couldn't defend your family, if you missed a sports shooting contest, vote against me. But if you didn't, they weren't being truthful with you, and you need to send them a message. We've got to trust each other again. What's the great gift South Carolina has given to America in the last few months? When those people were slaughtered in that church in Charleston, and that congregation lived its faith by forgiving that deeply troubled young man who never should have had a gun in the first place because he was mentally ill. You touched the hearts of the whole state. And a Republican female legislator who was a direct descendant of the president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, got up and gave the darndest 4-minute speech I ever heard. And she essentially said, look, guys, if I can get over this, you can get over this. We got to live together and think about the future. Get over it, take the flag down, get rid of it. Now, that was a gift. For a brief moment, all of you were part of a community again, an inclusive community. Nobody was riding around in black helicopters taking people's guns away. When we had background checks, you know, you'll hear them say it won't matter now, we've messed it up so much, there's so many guns, it doesn't make any difference. No, it won't solve every problem, but 1 million felons, fugitives, stalkers, and domestic abusers could not get handguns. And when I left office, murder was at a 33-year low, and listen to this. All forms of illegal homicides using guns were at a 46-year low. A 46-year low because we trusted each other again, and we did something that made half good sense. We've got to do that again. That's what Hillary believes we can and should do. It's crazy not to have a background check law. And just one or two other things. It's very hard to have a unified society if you don't have a unified political system. And I don't mean we shouldn't argue. I don't mean we shouldn't have debates. I don't mean we shouldn't have heated disagreements. Diverse groups make better decisions than lone geniuses or a half a dozen geniuses that never disagree on anything, because nobody's right all the time. But you can't have a country so divided that by a 5-4 vote, the Supreme Court can gut the Voting Rights Act and make it harder for people to register and vote. So it starts with this appointment to the Supreme Court, and the president should make it. And look, and if he doesn't, you better make sure we get a Democratic president, because of the Republican Congress, they can put anybody they want on there. And even if he does make it, there'll probably be 1 or 2 other vacancies in the next 4 years. This is a big deal. I do not expect the Supreme Court to agree with me on everything. I wouldn't want that, because I'm not right all the time either. Nobody is. But America ought to be about a few basic things. And one of them is we want the largest number of our citizens to vote as possible in every single election. And I always tell, look, and those of us in our party all across America, we got to bear some responsibility for this mess, because our people turned out twice in huge numbers to vote for President Obama. They turned out to vote for me, and in 3 midterms, in 1994, 2010, and 2014, they didn't vote, and we're paying the consequences. And you can't cuss them out for something you didn't do. Still, we got no business restricting voting rights. Too many people died in the South for the right to vote. That's American. And until just a few years ago, almost every Republican agreed. We routinely extended that Voting Rights Act. Then the Supreme Court basically destroyed it. Now they're revisiting whether one person, one vote should be reversed or tightened to include only eligible voters, not all the people that live in your district. So if you live in a district with a lot of big families, you're going to be less represented. We got to do that. And we should revisit that Citizens United decision, because look what it says. It says we all have a right to free speech, right? Okay, reach in your pocket and feel your change. Your money is part of your free speech. So Citizens United says the billionaire and the minimum wage worker are equally free to spend whatever they want on politics. I'm not making this up, that's what it says. If I had been teaching law school and I'd given that problem and somebody had written that answer, I would give that student an F. Equal voices, equal votes are not furthered by drastically unequal investments in campaigns. We've just gone, don't you think we've all learned more from all these debates and the campaigns and the meetings like this than we learn from ads run by secret committees who don't even disclose their donors? So we got to fix that. But we have to do it together. And the last point I want to make is about foreign policy and inclusion. Everything Hillary achieved as Secretary of State, as a senator, and the first New Yorker to be on the Armed Services Committee, and in the White House, when she got the children's health insurance law passed with working with Senator Kennedy, big part of the President Obama's health care bill now, more than 8 million kids insured. They put in a balanced budget act, 3/4 of the Republicans voted for it. She worked with the Republican House leader when I was president, who disliked me more than anybody else in Congress. I mean, and she went to him, she said, Congressman DeLay, Tom DeLay from Texas, I'm sure we don't agree on much. He said, Hillary, do we agree on anything? I said, yes, we do. You love your children, don't you? He said, sure I do. What's that got to do with anything? He said, your children are adopted. And we are full to the gills with kids in foster homes that won't be adopted because people are afraid they can't adopt past infancy and they're afraid to adopt a special needs kid. I want you to work with me. We'll write a bill that'll make it more attractive. And we won't be turning all these kids out of foster care with no place to go, no school to enter, no place to live even. They did. I signed the bill. Before I left office, adoptions out of foster care had increased by 80% because she found a way to work together. Everything she accomplished helping New York after 9/11, making sure our soldiers were properly equipped, making sure the guardsmen from the National Guard or the reserves who were in combat got the same care regular veterans did. She passed that bill with Senator Graham, Lindsey Graham. And she worked with John McCain on trying to make sure we did more for people with traumatic brain injuries and post-traumatic stress syndrome. Everything she did, she got Republican help for. In the State Department, she got the requisite 67 votes to ratify a treaty with Russia which reduces the threat of accidental or intentional nuclear war. That's no bad thing in this world, and that's a lot of Republicans to vote for it. When she did the Iran sanctions, everybody praised them, even the ones that didn't agree with our decision to postpone their nuclear program for 10 years. And China and Russia went along. I didn't think she could get them to do that. She always is bringing people together. You need that. But here's the point I want to make. We got to make more partners and fewer enemies. So when she became Secretary of State, the first thing she did was to ask the high-tech wizards who had helped elect President Obama. She called these guys. She said, okay, guys, I saw your work. You're one of the reasons I lost the election. Come to work for your country. Come to the State Department because we have to win the battle of the mind with billions of people involved over the social media. Come help me do that. And they started working. And as she always says, it may be because we live in New York and we know so many people of all faiths. But she says, you know, it is a terrible mistake what the other side's doing in demonizing Muslims because of their religion. We need moderate Muslims in this country to help us pull this together and to make the argument to people. You remember after 9/11 happened, they had that big board up in New York. It was on the news every night with everybody's picture that was still missing before we knew what happened to them. So after that happened, by the way, there were a couple hundred Muslims killed on 9/11. They were among the victims. We should never forget that. And Chelsea and I were trying to make ourselves useful because Hillary had to go back to Congress and try to get help for New York. So I'm standing at this board one day, and I'm standing with a guy who's like this big. And I looked up at him, and big tears were streaming down his face. And I said, sir, did you lose anyone? And he looked at me and said, no, but I hate what they did more than almost anybody else. He said, I am an Egyptian, Muslim, American, and I am so afraid my fellow Americans will never trust me again. A couple of days after this San Bernardino business, there was a little noticed attempt at an armed robbery at a convenience store in the Bronx in New York City. Two guys come in with guns. One guy holds the gun on the door, other guy holds the gun on the guy in the behind the cash register. Open the register, give me the money. Guy opens the register, gets the money in his hand. He's about to place it in the robber's hand, and he blurts out, I've only had this job a year. It's not my money, it's not yours. He slaps at the gun hand. The gun goes off, misses him by about this much. But thankfully, they realized they just shot a gun in broad daylight in New York, so they ran off. The guy goes next door, calls the police, waits for him to come, makes a report. His boss shows up. The guy is so impressed that he gives him the afternoon off. What's that got to do with what I'm telling you? That man came here in 2002 as a fully documented American immigrant from Yemen. He went home to this tiny apartment he keeps because he sends every dollar he can home, and has for more than 13 years now, to his wife and 4 children, now 15, 17, 19, and 21. And he pulled out his prayer rug and got down on his knees and thanked his Maker for sparing his life. And he prayed maybe now finally his wife and children would be able to join him. He didn't break any rules. He played by the rules. And he is far more representative of America's Muslim communities than what happened in San Bernardino. We need those folks to be part of our American response to build a united world. So that's my pitch. You know, this is pretty special to us, this campaign in South Carolina. Our daughter learned to ride a bicycle in South Carolina on the beach on Kiowa Island. When I was a young parent, we'd drive over here for several years and watch Chelsea play. Long before that, when Hillary got out of law school, she went to work for Marion Wright Edelman of Bennettsville, South Carolina, at the Children's Defense Fund. So her first job was coming to South Carolina to try to figure out why in the wide world so many African-American teenagers were being jailed in prisons with adults and kept there for life and having their lives ruined. Then she went to Alabama and posed as a housewife moving to town to expose the fact that private academies, which were illegally claiming federal tax breaks, were nothing more than segregated schools. She goes in and makes nice to this guy. This took a lot of guts 40 years ago. And she said, just tell me yes or no. I just want a yes or no answer. Will my child be in an all-white school or not? And the guy said, absolutely. She had him. They filed a report, they lost their tax credits, and it changed practices all across the South. She's always been doing stuff like this. She went to Texas for the Democratic Party to register historically, totally and intentionally under-registered Hispanic voters. She came to Arkansas and gave poor people in the Ozark Mountains the first legal assistance they'd ever gotten through our legal aid clinic. She's always been doing this. There are lots of reasons that you could vote for her. She's the only person who's had both the domestic and foreign policy experience that are required of the next president in a turbulent world. She has been acclaimed and done things only with bipartisan support that no one else can claim running for president. It wouldn't be a bad thing to have the first woman president. It would be a good thing. There are lots of reasons, but I think you should vote for her because we need a change maker. It's one thing to talk about and much harder to do. And everything she has ever touched, she's made better. Every person she has ever touched, she's made better. I know these Republicans are being mean to her now, and they get her some bad headlines. They've been working hard on it for 3 years. They are really smart. And they don't want you to nominate her. They're saying, please send us somebody else. She'll make us behave and get something done. We're laughing, but look, what matters? If you got more yesterdays and tomorrows, I'll tell you what matters. Are people better off when you quit than when you started? The children and young people have a brighter future. And are we coming together instead of being torn apart? I'm sick of all that tearing apart. If you want to be able to say aloud, happy, convicted, yes, to all those 3 things, go out there tomorrow and give her a big victory and bring her home. We will never forget it. Thank you.